Shalom Aleichem, we're learning the Sicha of Metzora Beis. It's a Rashi Sicha. I think a little context can help us understand it. So before I just give a little nekuda, a little point that the Rabbi said, the original Farbrengen about the lesson, just an interesting point that didn't make it into the final version. I first want to go and actually just give some context to the Sicha from the Pesukim themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm sharing the screen of the Kahas Chumash, an amazing Chumash. And we start off in Parsha Shmini. Parsha Shmini in Shvi'i. Okay, so let's just give some context. At that time, first we were talking about all the non-kosher birds and animals, etc. And how they give tumah to you. So in the Pasuk Yud Beis, V'chol asher yipol mehem moisam yitma. Any of these animals, if these dead creatures fall upon anything, it becomes ritually impure, it becomes tameh. This rule applies whether the object, be it a wooden vessel, garment, hide, or sack. In fact, anything asher yasam malachim, anything that work is done. How do you clean it? By mayim yuva, you bring it into the water, v'tamei ad the Torah, and then it'll be tamei until evening, and then it becomes pure. Pasuk continues, Pasuk Yud Lamed Gimel. V'chol kli cheres, unlike the kelim I was speaking about till now, eitz, beged, or sak, kli. In contrast, a kli cheres, an earthenware vessel, something made out of earth, if any of these animals falls into its interior, then whatever is inside the keli becomes tameh, and you have to break the keli. So what is it? In the previous pasuk, what it was saying that if it falls into it, it makes it tameh. And in the next pasuk it says, kli cheres, if it falls into it, it's tameh. Seemingly they're the same thing. But the truth is, over there, it doesn't say el teiche, it says alav. In pasuk lamed beis, if it falls on it, so in other words, if it touches it. In pasuk lamed gimel, it says el teiche, into it. So from here, Rashi learns, ein kli cheres metame, that the kli cheres only makes tameh me'aviroi, in the space within, in other words, in the air within the keli. Whatever is in the tameh, the kli comes and makes tameh everything that's in it. And you have to break it because ain't tara b'mikveh, there's no way to cleanse a kli cheres through the mikveh. So what do we see? That by a kli cheres, it only becomes tameh if it falls into the interior, but not if it simply touches the external surface. If they fall into it, or even if they don't fall all the way in, but they're suspended within it, I don't know, string, whatever, it impurifies everything. That's what it said in Pasuk Lamed Gimel. Then it continues about food, etc. Fine. That's Parshas 2 weeks ago. Now it's our Parsha. And it's Perek, it's towards the end of the Parsha, as you see, it's in the Aliyah of Chamishi. And over here, what are we talking about? We're talking about the laws of a Zav. A Zav is a man that has a discharge, as the Rabbi explains at the end of the Sicha. It's an unnatural discharge, and therefore it has its own categories. Pretty much the whole Aliyah of Chamishi talks about it. Dabdol b'nei Yisrael, talk to the Yidden, that's the beginning of the Perek, and tell them whenever there's a Zav, this is what the laws of the Zav are, and he goes extensively. If he sits on something, if he touches something, if he spits on something, if he rides on something, etc. Now, comes to Pasuk Yud Beis, ukli chedes, and a vessel of chedes, again, an earthenware vessel, asher yiga by hazav, that the zav touches, yishaver, has to be broken. The chol kliyates, but anything that's wood doesn't have to be broken. Yishat pamayim has to be washed over, covered by water. Okay. comes Rashi on Pasuk Yud Beis, the Rashi that we learned in the Sicha. Yachel afilu naga b'acharev, on the words kli cheres ashiga b'azav, asks Rashi, you would have thought even if you touch it from the outside. If you go to Teres Kohanim, you'll see ad ezu magoyshu b'kuloi. So what do you learn? Have a from here you learn zeh seitoi, that this is not a prohibition on touch. Over here, the word yiga does not mean touch. It means moved, haseitai. So literally Rashi is changing the literal pshat of the pasuk. The klicher is seemingly yigabai. But the problem with yigabai, because we learned in the previous in Parsha Shmini, that touching from the outside doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make tameh. So therefore it has to be not yiga, but hesed. So it adds a detail to the previous Shmini, because last time I made it sound like if you touch it, there's no issue. Over here he says if you touch it and move it, it's an issue, whether directly or indirectly. In other words, if you touch it without moving it, it doesn't become tameh. So this pasuk is adding a very special detail to the pasuk of Parsha Shmini, because what it's saying is touching is not an issue, but touching and moving is an issue, and therefore it has to be then shattered in order to be purified. However, a kli eitz, he touches it, it only becomes defiled when he touches it, not when he moves it indirectly. So it's actually different. But it does become tameh if I touch it from the outside. But if I move it indirectly, if I move it directly, that means I'm touching it anyway. But if I move it indirectly, then there's no issue. Okay, so that's what we learned in the Pesukim, and that's like really the context for the Sicha. It's only after you, at least the way I found understanding the Sicha, it's only after learning both Pesukim in the source it's easier to understand was datzich. Okay, now let's just finish off on one nekuda. The Rebbe, in the end of the Sicha, speaks about the lesson. And the Rebbe was talking about that the Eibishter gave us a body, and ultimately we have to eat and drink. Al pin teva, according to nature, you have enjoyment of it. So the Rebbe says like this: Afal pi, even though that Rabeinu Hakadosh, it says in the Gemara in Ksubas that just before he died, he picked up his fingers to Shemayim, and he said, "Zakav etzvayis," and he said, I didn't have pleasure from this world, even on my pinky finger. Haste, but so you think that it's possible not to have any pleasure. Says the Rebbe, haste erdach Rabeinu Hakadosh. We're talking about Rabeinu Hakadosh. Masha'enken, however, by every yid, kemen you can't demand that when he has a shaykhus ugashmis, they should not have anything become attached to it. Lav kol it's not a sustainable, or it's not manageable for the average mind. Just the opposite. The lashon is if you're coming to cleanse something and cause the bearer to fix it, then you have to get into it, and therefore you get into the clothing. And like it says, if somebody fights with a dirty person, they get dirty as well. It's inevitable that we're going to get affected. And on this we say that even nevertheless, it's not negeya, it doesn't affect the metzius, the fundamental core of a yid. Because that's the way Hashem created it. However, if the tumah comes b'pnimius, then you have to break. And even such a tumah chamuda like tumah zav cannot be metame yidden. And then he continues with the various nekudas that we learned in the Sicha. And then the Rebbe finished off because it was that year was Tafshin Lamed Vav, and the capital of the Rebbe was Ayin Dalet. Und so wird der Velikim Malki Mikedem Pearl Yeshuvas Bekedev Haaretz. And to Mamna Kainas Tzaddik, which is the next capital, which the Rebbe started, that just around then. Like he says in Medrash, that it's going to pick, that to Mamna Kainas Tzaddik, the Tzaddik will fly. The Chalkani, the Shem Magdeh, to Mamna Kainas Tzaddik, that was also the Nigan of the year. On this gate of Keren Melech HaMashiach, this refers to Keren the Melech HaMashiach, that's what the Medrash says. Yavavi Galenu, Yelchin Kemis Latzenu, Bagola Didan, wishing every one of us a kosher and Pesach.